This year's World Cup in Qatar kicked off amid some of the fiercest controversy the tournament has ever seen, from deaths of migrant workers to environmental and LGBTQ rights concerns. But over 2 weeks later, as we head into the quarterfinals, enthusiasm has taken hold and plans to boycott seem largely abandoned. Here in France, TV audiences have been comparable to 2018. Beyond that controversy, some matchups have had diplomatic resonance, from a politically charged game between the U.S. and Iran to a looming clash between England and France. Well, to discuss all of these issues of sports diplomacy, I'm joined on set by Simon Rofe, a senior research fellow at the Institute of Sports Humanities. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And we do have a lot to get through, but I wanted to have you just start by explaining what we're talking about when we talk about sports diplomacy.
Well, thank you. Sports diplomacy is the coming together of the realms of sport and diplomacy, a network of networks, understanding the different nodes in the worlds of sport, whether that's the match that's taking place, the fixture arrangement, the kit manufacturer, the sponsor. There's so many different interlocutors with the society in which we live. And within the diplomatic realm, those processes of negotiation, representation and communication, those three things, they are really the substance of the diplomatic process, and they can happen typically in embassies and with ambassadors and potentially those cocktail parties, but actually more substantially within the human interactions. And that very much takes place within the sporting infrastructure.
Yes, was it more about sort of creating connections between countries through sports, or is it more about each individual country just trying to get their own soft power?
Well, there's an element of certainly the discussion of soft power and how sport and diplomacy works. So certainly putting yourself on a platform, using sport to promote a message, as many countries have done, as Qatar is doing now during the course of the men's FIFA World Cup. But also there is just this human interaction, the communication, the communicative power of sport is so great. We don't need to be able to speak the same language. We don't need to be able to understand the rules. You can watch it in any playground. Young children will simply start playing games amongst themselves without referring to, the organising body that in Switzerland or the code of conduct that is manifest by a referee. They can simply play. And because of that, connections are made. Some of them are very trivial and end when the game finishes, but some of them can be more substantial, and building out from that allows for some other diplomatic connections.
And so as someone who studies sports diplomacy, what do you make of the criticism that we've seen of this year's men's tournament in Qatar?
Well, certainly the criticism has been, vociferous, particularly in certain sections of the Western press. There is controversy undoubtedly about the way in which Qatar won the bid back in 2010. And that reflects, on the organisation that awarded the World Cup, which is FIFA. And the regime at FIFA has changed substantially. That's not to say that FIFA couldn't change some more, as any organisation. But that sort of perhaps put Qatar on the back foot. The other thing that I think is important is that Qatar's had longer in the spotlight than any other organising committee. 12 years to be scrutinised. Now, they've had lots of opportunity because of that time, and I think it's fair to say that they've taken advantage of that. Their Aspire programme, particularly building towards their national goals for 2030. These are things that perhaps don't get the attention that some of the footballing headlines give. But I think the controversies around workers' rights, the deaths of some of the workers building the stadiums and LGBTQ+, they've been sort of big ticket items, and they've been certainly touch points for journalists to investigate, and quite rightly. But they have also provoked some change within the country, and certainly the modifications to the Khalifa employment systems are significant changes, and that's not to sort of be an apologist on behalf of Qatar, but recognise that change is happening within their country.
And there have been claims from Qatar and from FIFA that the criticism is a bit hypocritical. As you mentioned, it's coming a lot from Western journalists. What do you think of that argument? And can you give us some historical context? Is this really unprecedented criticism in Qatar, or hasn't there been criticism in the past as well?
There's been criticism of sporting hosts for sporting organisations in many regards. You can look at certainly the last Olympic Games in Beijing, the previous men's FIFA World Cup in Russia, but also more historically, the 1978 World Cup was held in Argentina under a military junta. So there have been criticisms of the human rights conduct of previous regimes that have hosted big sporting mega events. But the opportunity that Qatar has, particularly as the world's first Muslim nation to host a sport mega event, that opportunity was recognised amid the controversies of how the bid was won by FIFA, and that was a significant step. And I do think that represents a major achievement in terms of hosts for sport mega events. There is a historical context to this, which goes back not just to through the FIFA Men's World Cup, but almost to the ancient Olympics. The idea of the Olympic Truce, that sport was a moment to stop other activities, in this case war and conflict, and to allow for a dialogue, an occasion, an event, a spectacle, that from which other conversations could follow.
But isn't it the politicians who sort of first and foremost benefit from that Olympic truce? And is there a point at which we should start to draw the line?
There is a line that needs to be drawn, and that's always a judgment. Politicians have a profile to make that judgment, and the rest of the population, almost as consumers, have a judgment as to whether we choose to watch, choose to purchase, choose to engage with the interlocutors that the sport diplomacy network provides. But those where you seek those advantages, and I think particularly at the sort of people-to-people level, the opportunity for people to visit a place like Doha, to be part of those dialogues and to make those connections. Certainly some of the social projects that I've seen in operation, and I've mentioned one just in an organisation called Goal Click, for example. They're ways to talk for the people-to-people that perhaps take it away from the politicians a little, reduce the level of scrutiny on their activities, and emphasise the people-to-people dimensions.
Okay, I do want to talk a little bit more about the sort of diplomacy angle rather than the controversy. This World Cup, how does it compare in terms of geopolitical sort of diplomatic moments compared to other World Cups we've seen in the past?
Well, certainly it's provided a rich source of discussion for the likes of myself, and I've really enjoyed being able to pick out some of those moments. Certainly the Iran-USA fixture, two countries that do not have diplomatic relations, that have very strained rhetorics between them, were able to play a football match, as they did in France '98. And the outcome was a football match, not a political controversy, as which there could be. Now, there are other aspects of this. The success of the Moroccan team, I think particularly a North African team doing well in a fellow Islamic country, has produced a really important sort of moment and a rallying cry for people from the region, but also the broader Islamic world. And to overcome some of the European teams that they have in doing so, I think is a significant one. And of course, we have the opportunity for a French-England fixture coming up. So maybe there's some denouement to the entente cordiale that we may see come Saturday evening.
That's definitely one that's going to be very closely followed in the newsroom. From a purely diplomatic standpoint, which two teams would you be interested to see in the final?
From the teams we have left, I think one of the aspects of having the French retain the trophy would be certainly a challenge. On the other side of the draw, and if I've got this right, I think Brazil's are so connected to football. It's part of their national culture to such a degree that were the Brazilians to play the French in the final, a rerun of '98, we may see a different outcome.
And who needs that diplomatic victory more right now, Brazil or France?
Well, very possibly Brazil, but I will leave that to others to judge.
All right, Simon Rofe, thank you so much for being here. We're going to have to leave it there. That was Simon Rofe from the Institute of Sports Humanities. For those of you